So, all right, let's begin. Okay, so today I'd like to cover a few things. Let's see. Is the audio messed up? Let me see if it's... Oh, no, it should be fine. Okay. All right. Let's begin. So, today I want to talk about a few things. So, the first thing I want to talk about is... well, first let me adjust my font size. Let's adjust it to, say, 20. That way you can see things a little bit better. So I want to talk about print, I want to talk about input, and I want to talk about variables a little bit. And in so doing, I'm going to also talk about using, say, we'll do things on PuTTY or using the SSH terminal. And I'm going to introduce WinSCP for Windows users. What else? I might create a course GitHub. We didn't do any coding last time, so I didn't have any reason to have a course GitHub, but now we might have some reason to create one. And I think that will be it for the day once we do all of that stuff. So, yeah, let's begin. Let's get started. So, some of you have asked about how to transfer files back and forth between, say you're on a Windows machine and you want to transfer files back and forth between your Linux, the GL server, right? So you want to send stuff from your computer to the GL server. And so there's a really dumb way of doing it. So you can say, hey, print, this is a program. And then what you can do, and this is what some people do, you can open up a PuTTY or whatever you want, so PuTTY. And so you can open up a GL session. And once you open up a GL session, you can say like Emacs test file. And then you can literally just copy, and then what you can do is paste. And so pasting in PuTTY is a right click. And so you can do that. I really don't recommend this, because the problem is that Python is a white space sensitive language, which means that like the number of tabs determines what level of code you're at. So you cannot just expect that this is going to work. If you have a whole bunch of tabs or something like that in there, it will possibly mess your code up pretty bad. So don't do this, right? Unless of course it's literally just one print statement. What I did here is just fine, but in the future don't do something like this. So you're asking, well, what do I do instead? Okay, cool. Let me pull up something. Okay, let me pull up a new Firefox. So you should look, if you're on Windows, you should look for a program called WinSCP. There's another alternative you can use, which is called Bitvise. And Bitvise is actually, it's a cool program. It's kind of what I use. It has PuTTY and WinSCP kind of merged together. So it does both the SSH service and the SCP service. So it'll do a file transfer stuff, and it does the terminal business. But anyway, WinSCP is generally a pretty good way to do it. So you go to their site. So for Mac, there's a few things to do. So I think that I forget what the SCP on Mac. So the thing is that I will say that there is a terminal command. There is on Linux and on Mac, you can just do this, you can say, so you can SCP, and so this is, but I really recommend that if you're new to command line stuff, that you not do this. Unless you're really comfortable with it, then you can use the SCP command. But if you want, I think that there's actually like a program that you can download for Mac and Linux. So I think that there are clients. So for instance, there's this thing called CyberDuck, which, I mean, so technically, right, you don't need it. You don't need it. Typical installation for WinSCP, you do not need any custom stuff, okay? So, okay. So this is what WinSCP looks like when it opens up. And basically, I'm just going to select the GL session, which here, it just has gl.umbc.edu. And I'm going to go log in. And then it asks me for my username, because I guess I haven't entered that in a while. And then I have to click through this thing. Okay, then I put in my password, which is password. And then I hit OK. And then what it should do is it reads the remote directory, and then here is everything. So now what I can do is, for instance, if I open up something in PyCharm, so let's find something. Here is some stuff in Python, and I want to transfer a file. What I can do is, I mean, you can also navigate here, but even easier, you can just like drag and drop directly from your... Yeah, I do have Mountain Blade 2. I do. I played it quite a lot over the summer. It was a good game. I played less of the first one, mostly the second one. Anyway, so this is how you should transfer files. This is basically what you do is you drag your file, you dump it into the directory that you want on your Linux side. So this is my home computer. This is the Linux side here. And so anything that I dump into here, I can then, but this does not submit. So remember that doing this does not submit. You still have to submit your code. All this does is it transfers it into your personal Linux directory on the school servers. But your personal directory is not, is not the submit directory. Is that the only use for WinSCP? Well, yeah, basically. I mean, I think it also has a terminal. It does. Do you want to open up a separate shell? Let's see if we can do this. But it's not as good as Putty. It's kind of crap, so I would avoid using it. You can use WinSCP is just for Windows. If you're on Linux, let's see what a good Bitvise doesn't allow. Nothing allows you to submit. Nothing allows you to submit except for submit. You must run the submit command to submit. So all we're doing here is showing you how to get files from your home computer onto the Linux server. So what I mean by that is that basically, okay, no, I don't want this. I can use an extra sheet here. It doesn't matter. Basically, I drew this diagram before, right? Here's your computer. And here's the file you want to submit, right? .py. So you can use SCP, either WinSCP or Bitvise, etc., to get it to the school server. And then basically submit. That puts it, actually it's all still in the school server. What I really should say, this is the school server. And then submit puts it in the submit directories. But this is your personal And so that's basically how this works, is that here's your computer and you have a file. So you first do SCP to transfer that file onto your .py, and that'll transfer the file onto your account on GL, and then submit will transfer that file finally into the last thing. So I have this XP pen drawing tablet. Is it good? It's okay, it works. I bought it last semester when we made the transition to online, and it's been doing okay. Yeah, sure. So, okay, let's do a full example of it. I mean, so WinSCP puts your file on the GL server. PuTTY connects you also to the GL server, right? So PuTTY is a separate thing. Like, PuTTY is also on your computer, right? I'm trying to write with the mouse now. So PuTTY is here, and it connects you to the GL server and gives you a terminal. All right? So anyway, okay, let's figure out if we can do a full example of this then. So let's make a new file. Let's call this file CS201 print input. That'll be the name of the lecture for today. And then I'm going to have print x input s equals input tell me something. And you're like, okay, cool, that's some code. So now what I can do is I can use SCP here, and I pull up my directory. Where's my directory? Here it is. Oh, wait, no. Oh, by the way, if you ever want to open your directory, here's how you do it. You can right-click on a file, and then you go Show and Explorer, and it'll pop it up. So there it is. If it doesn't want to explode or crash or something, cool. And then you can say, this is the file I want. Now it's transferred to the GL server. So that's what it did. I just transferred it up to the GL server. So now this is my home computer here, so I can get rid of this folder. Now it's on the GL server, so now if I want to submit it, I pull up PuTTY, and I go ls, and I see, oh look, here it is, CS201 print input. If I Emacs into it, here's the file. WinSCP is able to submit things, but you should do it with PuTTY. Just do it with PuTTY, okay? Like, you can open up a terminal session here on WinSCP, but use PuTTY or Bitvise. If you really want to, you can use Bitvise for both. I've started using Bitvise for both. But anyway, so then, yeah, if you want to submit, say, CMSC 201, homework 0, because I know that exists, and then CS201, and then done. So that is the full process, okay? That gets you from your computer to the GL server. Yeah, if you're on Mac, you don't need any of those. You can just run the SCP command from the terminal, or you can use this CyberDuck program. Basically, yeah, instead on Mac, instead of using WinSCP, you would use CyberDuck. I think CyberDuck will do the same thing. Now, I don't have a Mac, so I can't actually do it, but I think CyberDuck is also free, so that's good. I mean, otherwise I would just tell you to learn the SCP commands. But basically, anything that has two directories on it that you can see your computer and your GL server, and then you submit, right? That's what you need. Yeah, so WinSCP would be replaced with CyberDuck if you're on Mac. Okay. All right. So what were the things that I wanted to do today? We will do a little bit of this. I think I have covered this. What are the benefits of putting our stuff onto the server besides submitting in the work? That is the primary benefit. You can do every piece of work in the class and still get a 0 if you don't submit everything on the server. So it's very easy to do your work on your own computer, and for credit, you need to submit the work on the GL server. And so that's really the idea. Now, some people will code everything in Emacs for their first 2 programming classes here. They won't use anything on their local machine. They'll just either PuTTY or SSH into the GL server and do all their work there. So you can do that if you want. And I guess it's good because it's lightweight, and so you know where all your work is. We'll do this later. And so I think we're good right now on this. So yeah, so let's get started on things. Yeah, so let's talk about print and input and variables. So let's do the actual course. No, you don't need to take notes on the CMSC server. I don't think so. I mean, you can do your work wherever you want to do it. I mean, if I'm going to probably upload this to a course GitHub, so you don't have to really worry too much about, like, it depends on what kind of notes you're taking, is what I'll say. Okay, so let's proceed. So what is print? This is print. So what does print do? Print is an internal Python command. Why not use Blackboard to submit? Historical reasons. Also, Blackboard can't run Python, so we use the GL server. Like, the idea of the GL server is that the GL server runs Python 3, so you can run your code on the server. Okay. Yeah, so basically, whatever that means. Yeah, so let me just tell you about strings in Python a little bit. Now, we'll talk more about strings later, but in Python, this is a string, and this is a string. So in languages like C++, for instance, usually for a character, you only use this for a single character, the single tick marks, and you use the quotation marks for a full string with multiple characters, right? And so there is actually a difference in languages like C++. In Python, however, there is no difference. Okay? So basically, so these two things, at least to Python, are these are identical from Python perspective. And of course you're like, well, what does it do? Oh yeah, so a string is a sequence of characters. So basically, in all computers, we need a way to output stuff to the screen, right? We need a way to have, I was going to say strings. We need a way to have basically words and text and things that you can output. And so a string is a way to do that in a computer. It's basically, this tells Python to store this little grouping of characters in a specific memory location, and then when you need that memory, it pulls it up and prints it out. So, and I'm kind of describing variables a little bit too here, but strings are specifically sequences of characters, and so it can be either a list, an array. When we get to those things, it can be anything like that. Nothing denotes a single character in Python, so there is no single character in Python. It's all just strings. Well, I'll put 2 asterisks on that. I'll talk about what I mean by that later. Okay, so what are the kinds of things you can print? Well, let me go through it. So you can print like this. You can print, say, 5. Let me just run this. Nope, I'm not running it. There we go. So you just have to make sure sometimes if you accidentally have the wrong Python file selected and you run it, even if this file is up, oh, wait, what? Okay, whatever. So it's running 201 print input here. So if you see the wrong file name here, then it was just running the previous file. Let's even get rid of it. Well, yeah. So you can print 5, you can print like 4.28, whatever. Well, hang on. So you can print strings, you can print numbers, and you can print things called booleans. So you can print true and false. And you notice that this is not a string. True is a special keyword in Python. true and false are special keywords. So they are not just the string true and false. But I'll get into more about that when we get to that. So basically, print can also take in integers and floating point numbers. Basically, whenever we say floating point numbers in computer science, what we really mean is a number with a decimal on it. Okay? Python definitely has booleans, right? The true and false are the booleans. So if we print all this out, we see, okay, 5, 4.22, 288, 12, true and false, right? I'm just going to say no to does Python follow the same rules as C++ when using print? Probably, it's so different that it's very hard to say. And your question is what is the, and Haonan's question is what is the difference between print hello and print string hello? And so I haven't even talked about this yet, so I don't really want to get into this yet, but this will cast whatever is in here to a string if possible. So actually the difference here is nothing. It's identical. Can you print images with image data? No. No. Print only... So print sends data to what's called std out, which is standard out. And so standard out is a stream on either a Windows, a Mac, or a Linux machine that can only really print text. Now, nowadays, it can print some formatted text. It can do a little bit more than that, especially on some computers. But just pretend like anything you put in string, or I'm sorry, in terms of print, it can basically print out text only. And so if you want to do images, if you want to do graphical stuff like that, when casting, would you still need the apostrophes? Yes, because the problem is that if you do this, then Python thinks that hello is a variable. And so if I try to run this, then what we're going to see here is that we'll get a name error. Let's see. Yeah, name error. Name hello is not defined, right? And the reason why we get that is because it doesn't know that this is a string. It thinks that this is a variable, and so it tries to access a variable called hello, but there is no such variable, so so it won't do it. Okay, cool. So there are basically a number of ways to print things. So basically you can print things by, you can print things like multiple things, like you can say something like, this is a way to print things 17, right? So this will print out each one of these things independently, right? And it will probably put a space between them. Let's see. Your question is, if you have a variable x equals 5 and you want to make it into a string, yes, that's called casting, yes. But as it turns out, you don't need to cast when you print. And the reason for that is that print will understand anything that is printable. And what I mean by that is that, like, if you say print, let me just do what your example is, x equals 5, and I'm going to print out x, right? So what does this code do, right? And so the answer is that it declares a variable with Python. It tells Python there is something now called x out there. And then what it does is it says we are going to assign 5 into the variable x. And so basically what it's going to do here is it assigns x, or it assigns 5 into the variable x, and then it prints out that variable. So let me show you that it works. Cool. And you're like, well, what's the point of that? Well, I don't know what the point of that is. But there's no real point of this piece of code, but you'll see that we're going to use variables quite a lot later. Now, if you did something, so if you did this and cast it to a string, you'll notice that it doesn't make a visual difference. But what it's actually doing is it's making this into a string, and then it's printing out that string, but it's doing that anyway in just a different order. Do you need to assign what type a variable is? Variables in Python don't really have type. So let me show you what I mean by that. You can say x equals 5 up there, and then this is the same x equals the string, hello there, I am now a string. And now I can print x again. And then I can say x equals 3.1415926535897. Okay, and then I can print out x again. And you notice here that this is very different from this is very different from a language. This is what I should say is this is not like C++, Java, C#, or what other languages? C, Rust, blah blah, right? Tons of others. These languages are called typed languages because you have to specify the type of the thing. In terms of labs this week, there are no labs this week. So the point is that so basically Python is not a typed language. That does not mean that type does not exist, right? So in a non-typed language, type still exists. So that's the thing that people might be a little bit confused. Float, so yeah, I think that the float's accuracy was triggered here, but also print only prints up to a certain length. So I think it's a little bit of both. Okay. All right. What else do I want to say? So, languages like Python, Ruby are non-typed. And so what that means is that you can just declare a variable, say y equals 2, and then you can reassign it to something of a different type. So this is not possible in languages like C++ or Java, but in Python, it's totally okay. And so let me show you what Python understands. So if I print out the type of y here, and then I print out the type of y here, then you see here, it says, oh, 2 is a class int, so it thinks it's an integer. And it thinks hello is a class string. And it's right because it's Python, and so it knows what type of things are. So being a non-typed language, right, doesn't mean there isn't type. What it means is that variables can have different types, or variables can change their type. Maybe that's the right way to say it. Okay. Anyway. Cool. Okay, so let's keep going. So there's another way to print multiple things. So for instance, if you want to print something, if you want to print multiple things and say they're all strings, you can print this is a string. And so this will print out this is a string, but you'll notice that it doesn't have any right, JavaScript is kind of, Yeah, I would say that on the spectrum versus like Python all the way to like C++, JavaScript is like 80% of the way to Python in terms of being typed as a language. There's very, and again, you see that in JavaScript there's still types. It's just that those types are not like a variable can be reassigned to being a different type. Let's not talk about HTML. So, okay. So you notice that this is a string, doesn't have any spaces in it. So what this is actually doing here is called string concatenation. And so what that means here is that this plus operator is smashing these strings together. But here's the problem with using, so if your question is, am I allowed to use the commas or am I supposed to use the pluses? The answer is either, really, except that what you have to do is you have to remind yourself that when you're doing the pluses, everything has to be string. So this will, be output. This is fine, but then if I say 17 here, there's actually a problem here. This is, Python, well, so PyCharm is trying to yell at me a little bit. It's like expected type string dot type in instead, but I'm going to ignore that. So, so if you print this out, whoops, here's the error. So it'll say can only concatenate a string type. So there's a way to fix this, which is called casting. So I'm going to teach you at least how to cast the strings today. And how you cast the strings is this. You put whatever the non-string is inside of this thing. And, yeah, I know I have to space them, but I'm not going to do that. Well, I'm going to do that now, because I do feel a little bit awful. Yeah, so there are a bunch of ways to do this kind of thing. As it turns out, Python has just about every way to do it. Well, yes, you could. So you can do this, and then you don't have to cast to a string. So either way is fine. The only problem is that usually what you're doing is usually 17 will be in some variable. So what you're really going to be doing is you're going to be like print the output that I care about is, and then you'll say output. And output is going to be equal to 17. Now that's the problem, right? So the problem is that you're not going to necessarily realize that it's 17. So what you want to do is you want to do something like string output like this, and then it will output it correctly. I'm not entirely sure what that is. I don't know. Does that work? So, sort of. So there's a number of ways to do it, and so if you're used to C++, or I should say actually if you're used to C style things with like printf, C style, you can do something like this. If you do %d, and then you can do this. And you can also do this. So you might be thinking, why on earth has Python given us 800 ways, well, more like 4 or 5 different ways, to do the identical thing? And so the reason why it does that is because each one of these comes from different languages, and so basically everybody wanted their own way to output things, like put put integers into strings and output them and stuff. And so these are all different ways you can do it. Single, or can you use double quotation marks? Yeah, so as I said earlier on, you can use double quotation marks as well. This is fine. Okay. So, and if you're unfamiliar, how do you add? Oh, good question. So let's take this time right before I talk about input. So this is the last thing that I want to say about strings, and that's a good question. So maybe you want a quotation mark inside your string. So maybe you want to print out like, as Shakespeare says, and then you want to say something like, you know, 'tis nobler to endure the slings of, you know, whatever. So this is not going to work, and you notice that PyCharm is screaming its little red head at me, and it's like, oh, don't do that. Syntax error. It does not understand what I'm trying to do here. So, and the reason why is because it thinks that this is the beginning of a string, and it thinks that this is the end of a string, and then it thinks that this is who knows what. It doesn't know what to do, right, with this, because it doesn't understand what this is doing outside of a string. So what you can do is called an escape sequence. And the escape sequence in this case is just going to be a backslash and the quotation mark. And so if I do this now, then I reprint it. Is it? Anyway. Right. So the point here is that this will tell Python, like what this tells Python is, I am not an end string thingy. I am a quotation mark, right? So that's what it tells Python. Okay. All right. So what else do we want to talk about? So what other kind of escape sequences are there? Well, let me show you some. So here are some escape sequences. So let's say you use the single quotes to make a string. The same thing. Sorry about that. The same thing works with single quotes. And also, so there's some other things that you might consider doing in a string. So let's think about the things that you can do in a string. Right. What if you want a tabbed character? So this is the tab character. And this is endline. So you see that when it prints out this last set of things, what it does here is it says, it has a tab here, and it says, this is tab. And then it says, and then it breaks the line, and then it says, and this is end line. Okay? What if you want to type, so a good question. What if you want to type, so your question is actually more general. What if you just want to type a backslash and be safe? Right? So typing a backslash, now you see that typing a backslash can be dangerous in strings, right? Because if you type a backslash and then you type, say, like if you have print backslash q, that is just going to print out backslash q, and you're like, okay, but what if I want this? And you're like, okay, well that just prints out a tab character. Well, there's an escape sequence for the escape sequence. All right, so that's how you escape the escape. And so even here, it's kind of warning you. It says invalid escape sequence, and so what Python does is it interprets this as a backslash. But actually, if you want to make this completely safe, just in case there's actually a /q escape sequence, that is what Python will like, right? So Python prefers that. Okay? So, okay. Cool. So the important escape sequences are for new line, for tab, and what else? Sometimes /A or /B, I forget which one it is, can be actually a computer beep, but it doesn't always work. So, is there a print line sequence? I don't know what that means. Print ln is more like, there's other languages that use print ln. Python just uses print. Okay. So yeah, so that's a usual type of trick question. We're like, okay, what prints out if you do this, right? And this is 6 backslashes. And you will think to yourself, huh, does it print out 5 backslashes? Or 3 backslashes? Or something else, right? So, because this one is the escape, right? And so is it escaping all 5 of these, or is it just escaping, is it paired up? So it's like escape, 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 backslash. And so the good news is that it's, well, the good news is that it's paired, okay? So, like that. So you see that this only prints out 3 backslashes. So you can make some horrible looking things like something like this. Can you use double and then single quotes in the string? So the rule is that in Python, you must start and end a string with the same quotation mark. So either, but if you want to do something like this and you say, this has a quote in it, you know, as the great men say, right? So this is completely fine because Python is waiting until it sees the end character here. Now you might want to be slightly careful, right? If you ever think that some programmer is going to change this to a single quote, then you see it's going to break stuff. So if you are really, really absolutely careful, you can always convert these to escape sequences. But currently, Python does not have a problem with this. What happens if you have an odd number of backslashes? Good question. Let's see. Oh, it thinks it's an end. Well, I don't know. Maybe Python. Let's see. Syntax error. Because it thinks that this is an escape sequence for the quotation mark, so it doesn't think. So if we do this, on the other hand, but then you know that we're cheating. So, yeah. So it apparently doesn't like that. Yeah. Okay, cool. There's only one last thing I want to say about escape sequences before I go on to variables. Input, I mean, and then we'll talk about variables. So when we are dealing with escape sequences, there's one escape sequence that you're never actually going to use, and that's /R. But the only time when /R is used, so basically it was a difference in the early days in Windows versus Mac, or really Windows versus Linux and Unix. Every new line in Windows is actually a /R/N. And every new line in, so this is for Windows, and for Linux, it's just this. Now the good news But Windows will insert this character sometimes in files. So this is just an archaic thing. Basically, \R stands for carriage return. So if you've ever seen a typewriter, basically the idea was like when you put the carriage back, when you push the thing back and it made that clang noise, that's what this \R key is. So, so you should never use it, but I'm just saying that Windows sometimes, if you ever open up a hex editor and actually look at a file, you will see 2 characters for every line return rather than 1. It's just a rando fact that exists. Just for your future life, I guess. Okay. So, okay. Unless that's a pun. So, okay. All right, so now let's talk about input. Oh, and by the way, let me just tell you what these 3 quotation marks are. So 3 quotation marks are multi-line strings. They can also be used as comments. This is a big comment. We are about to start input now. Right? I think all of you are bored with print. You've printed everything that you can possibly print. And now we're going to talk about the things that we can input. All right? Yeah, so, I mean, well, the header is a comment of sorts. Right? Okay. So, input. So input is a function. And what does it mean to be a function? Well, it's basically the same thing as in math, right? In math, you have a function which is f of x, and then something pops out of that, right? And so you would say that y is equal to f of x. So that means that the variable x gets eaten by and spat out as y, right? So basically, like if f is equal to x squared, then f of 2 is equal to 4. But input is a different kind of function, right? Input is a function that what it does is it tells the computer, get a line of user input, and then send it back to us. Okay? And so it does actually take what's called a parameter, but what kind of parameter does it take? So in PyCharm, it actually shows you sometimes, I think maybe, yeah, no, it doesn't want to say. But if you notice that sometimes if I type input, right here it says input __ prompt. And so what that's telling us is that it wants some kind of string here. And so it basically wants me to be like, tell me a story. And then I have to assign it to a variable. So basically to assign it to a variable, I go story is equal to input, tell me a story. So let me show you how this works. And then of course I'm going to print out the story. So now it says tell me a story. And then what I'm going to do is say once upon a time, there was a giant cat and it ate things. And then I hit enter. And then when you hit enter, so basically input is waiting for a line return. Enter. Right? Once it gets an enter, it will return that to us, and then it sticks it into the variable story. Now, let me remind you that if you don't print out story, and I just run this code, and then it says tell me a story, and I say the story is about a knight in shining armor, or something, right? Nothing happens. Because I've commented out the print statement for story. And so basically nothing happens, right? Can you make it a multi-string with \n? Not really, because the problem is that you can't if you type \n, let me just show you what happens if you type \n. Tell me a story. One day, there was a girl. She typed \n. And you see, what it does is it understands this as a true backslash. So you cannot type escape sequences into input. It doesn't understand that. Basically, if you want to take multiple lines of input, you can have multiple input statements, and we can talk about how to do that in the future. Okay. Can you wait for input like a controller press? Well, your program does wait for the input to finish. Like your program, so the program doesn't go on until the user hits enter. So it just hangs there forever. You know, hangs until forever or enter. Okay. Well, okay, so this is kind of useful, but there's other things you can do, right? Let's talk about those other things. Let's say you don't want a string as the result to your input statement. Let's say you want a number. So now I have to introduce casting. So now we have to talk. Well, if you want to know how to pull stuff from Word and Excel files, there's a package in Python called, I think it's OpenPyXL. But other than that, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Okay. So, let's input, enter an integer. But if we print it, so x is an integer, right? And then we print out x. And let's even print out the type of x, right? So first thing we have to do is we have to tell a story. The story is that I'm about to type an integer. And so what is my integer going to be? 32, right? 2 to the 5th. Great number. All right, but here's the problem. 32, but its type is a string, right? It's not an integer. So input always produces strings. So let's say that you wanted to not produce a string. So this is how you do it. And so what you can do is you have to encapsulate, so you have to encase your input statement in an integer cast. So that's what this is called. We are casting the result to int. So the story this time is going to be, let's hope we get integer type this time. And so now let's enter an integer, 32, right? Our same favorite integer. And then I'm going to hit enter. 32, but now the type is of type integer. So what that means is, so now I'm safe to do integer calculations with this new integer variable. So for instance, I can print out, let's say, 3 times x is an integer plus 5, right? Do I need all this underscore stuff? The answer is no. I could just make this the variable like z, right? That's okay. But if you want to make a variable name that is multiple words, to make a multi-word variable, you have to use underscores. At least in Python snake case coding standard. And I'll explain all of that when we get to it. Can we put the int inside the input statement? No, and let me show you why not. So if you flip this, what's going to happen? So if you do this instead, this is what you're going to get. Tell me a story, ASDF, great story. Enter an integer, 55. Oh wait, okay, so it's going to work the first time, and then this time it exploded, And what happened here? Invalid literal int with base 10. So what it's saying here, this value error that it's giving us is a conversion case. So it's saying that the thing that you stuck inside this int cast is not something that I can convert to an integer, so it's yelling at me. So basically this is no good. Good. So what about camel case? Is it only for JavaScript? So camel case is standard. So camel case is standard in Java and JavaScript, and sometimes in C++. But what I'll say is that, can you make a calculator with the input functions? Yeah, maybe, if you have enough if statements, but I haven't taught if statements yet, so I don't know what an if statement is. Yeah. Okay, so here we go. Telling me a story. We love casting to ints. Enter an integer. Let's enter a different integer this time. 17. So 17, and then is 3 times 17 plus 5 equal to 56? Let's think about it for a second. 3 times 17, so 3 times 7 is 21, 3 times 10 is that. So we got 51 plus 5, 56. Okay, so this computes the correct output. Good question. So what if we put in a float? So I'm going to actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something tricky. You don't have to do this, but I'm just doing this in order so that none of this is going to run. Now let's say that we want to input, enter a floating point number, right? Oh, and one little tip. This is not really coding or anything. This is just a little tip. It's always good to put a space at the end of your input prompt. Because in Python, it doesn't put this extra space in for you. So you've noticed here that when it says tell me a story, the first character here is always just smashed right against the input prompt. And that's ugly. 55 didn't work because 3 times 17 plus 5 is 56. Okay, so if you want to cast it to a float, you can cast it to a float. Now, well, a float is not a floor, so that's a problem. That's right. So you notice here that because I have this input statement before this input statement, it's always going to run this first. So it's always going to make me tell a story before I can enter an integer. So this is what's called sequential logic. So it runs each line one after the other. But because I've done this tricky business, it's not going to do that anymore. This is not going to run anymore. It's just going to run this stuff. So I'm going to enter a floating point number, 2.71828, oh crap, 18459. That's as much of E as I know. Cool. Well, it didn't do anything. There is not a command to go back to line 5. That would be a go-to command. But there are ways to jump around, and that's called loops, if statements, functions. And that's what we're going to go into for like the rest of the entire semester. After we're done with variables, after we're done with input and print, after we're done with algebra, we are going to talk about those 3 things, loops, if statements, and functions, basically for the rest of the semester. So, okay. So here's a question. Enter a floating point number. Will 5 work? Yep, it'll work. So 5 works, but you notice we are also going to do classes and APIs, but that's later. Well, not really APIs, mostly classes, but that's later. So you notice how, because the type of this thing was a floating point variable, meaning it has a decimal point, when it was printed out, it printed out not as 5, but as 5.0. So Python kind of knows that this thing is a floating point number because we cast it to a float. Okay? And then can we add in, what about negative numbers? Negative numbers work. And then just to prove to you that it's actually doing something, what about things that are not floats? So a float is, it must be a number, so this didn't work. Okay. All right, and so you might be asking, why are we using floats and not doubles, right? Because in Java and in C++, most of the time, you are going to use doubles, right? Most of the time you don't use floats because they have lesser precision. In Python, there is no double. Everything is float. So float is the only floating point number. So there's no type double here. Okay. And so the last thing that well, okay, so I won't talk about. Well, so I'm just going to say that Python does a way better job with floating point precision than C++ does in terms of doubles or floats. Okay. So, all right. Cool. All right, nice. Wait, why haven't you been hidden yet? Excellent, excellent. So, if you don't know what a double type is, then don't worry about what doubles are. Doubles are floating point variables in different languages, but if you don't know what it is, don't worry about it. Just assume it's the same as a float. So in C++, for instance, and some other languages, like a float is a 32-bit bits, and a double, I think floats are 40 bits and doubles are 80 bits, if I'm not mistaken. But here's the thing. Python does something different. You want homework 1 already? Homework 1 was Friday. Okay. So, cool. Let me just check that. Oh, I'm wrong. Okay, it's 32 and 64, so I was right the first time. I don't know where I got 80 bits. That was crazy. Okay. Cool. What else do I want to say? There's one last type out there, which is a Boolean. But using bool is a little bit dangerous because converting something to bool, and let me just show you what happens if I do, and then we'll print B again. Well, make it B2. Function to a variable, then print the function which activates or runs the function. Yeah, so here when I run the input function, it does the input function first, and then it casts it to a float, and then after it's finished doing all of that stuff, then it does this equal sign and assigns it into here. Okay. So this is a little bit of wonkiness with Boolean. So keep in mind that a bool is going to do something a little weird with variables. So don't trust that it's going to cast false, like the string false, into false. It will actually cast it into true. Let me show you the kinds of things that can cast into false. So if I print out, say, bool empty string, or bool the number 0, or bool the number 0.0. So I'm gonna actually tell you. Yeah, so I skip all the story stuff by def tricky here, and then I just tab in all the code that I don't want to execute. Why is bool false equal to true? That's a good question. So these things are false, but this is true. And so the question is why? And the answer is, we'll talk about this later. It's just basically how Python determines true versus false with certain values. And I'll talk about that when we get to... I'll probably talk about that next time. Okay? So that's next time. But for now, let's just say that... not quite. So it's because it was also successful in converting the empty string. So, okay. Okay, so let's talk about variable assignment. So for instance here, if I say x is equal to 4, y is equal to 5, and then I say print x plus y plus 2, right? What do you notice about all these variable assignments? Can I do, for instance, 2 is equal to z? Well, okay, so it's underlined in red, so it doesn't seem to like it. But can I do it? Will Python execute it? And so let's try. So it says cannot assign to literal. So what's the problem here? And so the reason is because the way that Python assignment works is because on the left-hand side is the variable we're assigning to, and the right-hand side is the value or variable or calculation or function or whatever that will be evaluated. Okay, so basically if anything that you want to evaluate or calculate or do anything with has to go on the right-hand side, and anything that you want to assign into goes on to the left-hand side. So basically the left-hand side, basically LHS equals RHS is the idea. And so this is the variable, and this is whatever you want the variable to be. So, okay. So the way to think about it is that the equal sign is actually more like an arrow. What it does is it sticks things in this way. So whatever's in the right-hand side gets evaluated, and then it gets stuck into the left-hand side. Okay? So something like... So for instance, if you want to add two numbers, let's say you want to add two numbers. Let me comment out this thing here. Or actually, let me just tab it in. So let's do something like that. So this will allow you to add up two numbers like this. Enter a number. What's a good number? 31. What's another good number? 65,535. So the total is, I guess that, is that right? That looks right to me. 65566, cool. 512 is also a good number. Nothing wrong with 512. So okay. So we see that we can actually do something like this. Now, you can do much more... so the last thing I'm going to say is that you can do more complicated calculations using parentheses to enforce order of operations. So what do I mean by that? You know, what I mean by that is that if you want to do something like, let's print out, you know, x minus y divided by x plus y. So what I really want, for instance, is let's see if I have. Do I have the live board still up? Where's live board? Give me live board. Right, what I really want to do is I want to do something like, and so in math speak, what you need to do is you need to do something like x minus y divided by x plus y, like this, right? And so the question is, so this is math, and is this Python, right? And so the answer is yes. So it's perfectly okay in Python. Calculating in the print statement or making a variable, there is no difference. So you can do something like this. You can say z is equal to x minus y divided by x plus y here. And then what you can do is just print z. So this is the same as doing it in the print statement. Sometimes this is way better because now you have a variable that remembers the result, right? And so when you're writing computer programs, sometimes it's important. Can you use square brackets in Python? No, do not use square brackets. No square brackets until we do this. Okay, so now, all right. So now you want to do square roots. So you can print out, oh, hey, McCall. Welcome to class. So let's compute the square root of 2. So the remember that the square root, let's see. So remember from algebra that the square root of x is equal to x to the 1/2 power. Curly braces, don't use those either, and we'll talk about that. So, and definitely don't use the caret symbol. Don't use as power. Caret is something different in computer programming. It stands for bitwise XOR. So okay, so let's enter two numbers, so 5 and 2, and so the sum is 7. So you see here that, and then the result here was whatever this is, and then so here is the square root of 2, right? Printing out 2 to the power of 1/2. You can also use this double asterisk, or yeah, the double asterisk is general power. So this is just power, so you can use it with integers, floating point exponents. So you can do stuff like, what is 2 to the power of 2 to the power of I don't know, 64. You can do 3 to the power of 3.2. All kinds of things like this. Remainder is percent. Yes, that is mod, but I haven't discussed mod yet. So here we have, let's say 5 and 5. And so here we get, this is 2 to the power of 64. This is the square root of 2. And this is, I guess, 3 to the power of 3.2. No, that's like, that seems like Java. So there is a math library, but you don't need it to do powers. So you can just do this for powers. So don't import the math library. Unless we tell you. Okay? Yeah. So, okay. All right, so I think we've actually covered everything I need to cover for today. We've done print, we've done input, and we have talked about assigning things to variables. Can you do a power to a power? Yes, but you have to be careful, right? So let's see what this does. 2 to the power of 2 to the power of 4. And so my thinking is that this will evaluate as... Is this going to evaluate as this? I think maybe, if it reads left to right. So let's try it. So let's do 2 and 2. It doesn't. Okay. So it actually evaluates this way. So it evaluates right to left on powers. Yeah, your discussion can be from 2:30 to 3:15. I guess there's no problem with that necessarily. I guess it might be 3:25, something like that. No discussion today. Well, so this is like all those trick questions, right? Like, what is 5 minus 3 minus 2, right? Is it 0 or is it... So the question is, does it evaluate as 5 minus 3 minus 2, or does it evaluate as 5 minus 3 minus 2? Right? Because you see that the minus sign is not associative, and so this is a slight problem. And powers are not associative. So, you know, the PEDMAS doesn't actually say. It's an additional rule. It's an additional rule above that, which says that algebra generally evaluates. So I think that it should evaluate this way, so let's check it out. Let's see, 2 and 2. Yeah, so whereas powers are associating from right to left, standard arithmetic rules say to associate from left to right. PEMDAS? Yeah, probably. I never say it, and all I say is order of operations. So I think I just permuted whatever it is. Yeah. So, all right. The point is that this is actually standard arithmetic order of operations. The problem is that we don't actually... So mathematicians, or I shouldn't say mathematicians, math teachers generally don't teach this. And so it's a problem. Permutations, wait to 203 and take my 203 section. I teach permutations there. Okay. So, but yeah, generally for arithmetic operations, it goes left to right. So that's why this one works, because you would put the parentheses on from left to right rather than this one, which is the parentheses from right to left. Of course, Python is doing a weird thing here. Python is associating right to left here, which may cause confusion. So instead, your job is always use parens when you think there may be a problem. Okay? Always use parentheses when there may be an issue. So, okay. Okay. Well, I think that's all for today. I think we've done a good job. I think I've actually for once covered all the things I need to cover. So yeah, you should read through the lecture notes as well on things. Basically go through and check out the lecture notes on print, check out the lecture notes on variables, check out the lecture notes on order of operations. I haven't finished all the stuff about order of operations yet. We'll talk about order of operations again and again as we talk about basically logical statements like the use of the keyword and or and stuff like that. And I will try to post this on GitHub. I'll post the link. So the lecture notes are on the course materials on Blackboard. Okay. All right. So I think I will post this up on like the course GitHub. Not that this is like exceptionally interesting or anything. It's just, you know, I'll put it up. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So I'm getting to download SSH client, SSH server. Which one should I download? Client, I would think. Client. Yeah. What is GitHub? It's a place where you put code. You'll see. I'll send you a link on the Discord, okay? All right, everybody. That's all. Gitpod, never heard of that, so no. Can I get a GitHub account? You don't actually need a GitHub account, but you can get one. Yeah, you can sign up for GitHub, but you don't need one to just access it. Okay. Definitely free. PyCharm, WinSCP. It should all be free. Okay. I know, sorry guys. Let's do the outro now. It's time. It's time now. All right. See you later.